This is an NBC News special report. America strikes back. Here is Tom Brokaw.
Good afternoon, everyone. It does now appear that United States military action against targets in Afghanistan, that action is underway. Let's go to NBC's Jim Miklashevsky at the Pentagon for the latest. Jim?
Tom, U.S. military officials tell NBC News that the airstrikes have begun. According to these officials, it's going to be a combination of long-range. The first wave is going to involve a combination of long-range bombers, perhaps B-52s, perhaps B-2s, that are going to be launching airstrikes not only against Taliban military targets, but against the network of al-Qaeda terrorist camps located inside Afghanistan. Although many of those terrorist camps have been vacated just before and after the September 11th attacks on the United States, U.S. officials say, in fact, there has been considerable activity at some of these camps, which are expected to be targeted today. In addition to this first wave of bombing strikes on targets, military and terrorist targets inside Afghanistan today, Tom, at some point during the day, the U.S. will also begin airdropping food to the more than 1 million Afghan refugees. Tom?
All right, thank you very much, NBC Jim Miklashevsky. We'll let you get some additional information. We want to go to northern Afghanistan now, to the area that is held by the so-called Northern Alliance, the opponents of the Taliban. NBC's Tom Aspel is there. Tom, what are you seeing in the skies?
Tom, I can see some flashes of anti-aircraft fire a long way to the south of us, possibly between Bagram Air Base and Kabul itself. We've noticed every few seconds the flash of an anti-aircraft explosion in the sky. Visibility here clear. We can probably see up to 6 miles. There's a light haze over the ground, and we're just waiting for moonrise. Now, we cannot hear the sound of any explosions, but we can definitely see the flashes of anti-aircraft artillery in the distance there, Tom.
And what about the ground forces of the Northern Alliance? Have they been on the move?
They have been on the move today. We've seen some reinforcements moving towards the front, and in fact the Foreign Minister of the Northern Alliance, Dr. Abdullah, said that his troops in this sector, plus the 2 adjacent sectors to the east and to the west of Jabal Faraj, where I'm speaking to you from, are on a state of high alert. Now, Dr. Abdullah said once the attack starts that his men will not move forward immediately, but will wait 1 or 2 days, presumably, to get the go-ahead from the Americans to move through any possible area of targeting for airstrikes. Tom?
All right, thanks very much, NBC's Tom Aspel in northern Afghanistan, in the area that is held by the Northern Alliance. General Barry McCaffrey was a key general officer of the United States Armed Forces during Operation Desert Storm. He joins me now from Washington. This is a familiar pattern. First, you have to take out these, we presume, missile sites that are there, the SAM missile sites, and also make the point that you know where the training camps are, General.
Yeah. Well, I think the easy part's happening today, Tom. What we're seeing is the first day of the longest campaign since the War for Independence. These people are going to be placed at risk. What they value is going to be targeted. And I think today we're going to see the takedown, the beginning of the takedown of the Taliban defense infrastructure.
General, there has been so much discussion about the perils of getting involved militarily in Afghanistan. But talk for just a few moments about the nature of the American military action and what happened to the Russians, the differences.
Well, I mean, clearly the objectives are completely at odds with one another. In our case, we're going to go in and try and destroy and neutralize and disrupt the al-Qaeda terrorist network. That's target number 1. I see that going on for 6 months in the global context. Most important actors will be the FBI, the Customs Service, the CIA. But the military component of that, certainly the airstrikes, the Navy Tomahawk attacks, the operations by special units of the Army and the Navy and the Air Force will be a huge contribution. But at the end of the day, what we will do is we will confront this threat. We have no option. 5,000 U.S. dead. We will not allow this to happen again.
Thank you very much, General Barry McCaffrey, who will be with us throughout the day and throughout this long campaign. NBC's Washington Bureau Chief is Tim Russert. Tim, the big concerns in the national security apparatus of this administration is that any military action not set off some kind of a long-burning fuse among the Islamic radicals around the world.
Particularly, Tom, Pakistan. Pakistan has a nuclear bomb. That's why you saw close choreography, close coordination. A leading dissident who's been leading demonstrations in Pakistan is under house arrest. The Pakistanis want to take no chances. They have been very supportive of the United States. They have been assured this will be a selective strike, taking out the Taliban government in Afghanistan, and then followed with humanitarian aid. Tom, I can also report that the White House press secretary will be briefing us in just about a minute or so from the White House, and at 12:50, 10 minutes to 1 Eastern Time, the President of the United States will be addressing the nation.
All right, thank you very much, NBC's Tim Russert. You can see on your screen there some of the activity in the skies over northern Afghanistan. Let's go back to Jim Miklashevsky as we await Ari Fleischer at the White House. Jim?
Well, Tom, according to U.S. officials, this is just the first wave of what is going to be a sustained campaign for at least several days aimed at first taking out the Taliban air defense systems that will obviously make it easier for the U.S. military planes to operate in that area and to go after some of these terrorist camps that we talked about much earlier. But what U.S. officials are stressing is that even though this opening salvo is going to look very much, Tom, like the opening shots fired in Kosovo or even in the air wars, various air wars against Iraq, that this is going to be a very different kind of war, that this is not going to simply involve airstrikes. The U.S. sort of brushes its hands and walks away. This is going to be a very long, sustained effort. These initial airstrikes are meant to soften the Taliban military. The belief among those here and even in the region is that Taliban could fold very quickly, opening the way for other U.S. troops. Tom?
All right, thank you very much, NBC's Jim Miklashevsky. Let's go to Tom Aspel now, who is in northern Afghanistan, and he is a close witness to what is going on in the skies there, Tom.
Hi, Tom. Well, we're still seeing just the occasional flashes of what look to be AAA fire going up into the sky there. No beams going up like they're shooting trails of fire up there. Just the occasional burst in the sky, probably between here and Kabul, a distance of some 40 miles. So around the front line of the Northern Alliance forces and the Taliban forces, a distance of about 20 miles. And we noticed about half an hour ago there was a small artillery barrage. We couldn't tell whether it's from the Taliban or the Northern Alliance. We heard the crash of explosives in the distance, but we didn't think they were airstrikes. And it's only within the last few minutes we've noticed those pinpricks of light in the sky there looking like AAA fire. Tom?
All right, thank you very much, NBC's Tom Aspel, veteran war correspondent. AAA fire is anti-aircraft fire. And we want to go now to NBC's Dana Lewis, who's at the headquarters of the Northern Alliance. Dana, what are they telling you there?
Well, Tom, they had been predicting this for several days now, and today they said it could happen at any time. And in fact, Northern Alliance officials, the foreign minister, Dr. Abdullah, said he had been in daily contact with the United States. And today they were asked to clear their airspace and ground their aircraft. So they knew this was coming, and they agreed to do so. They put their helicopters on the ground and their fixed-wing aircraft on the ground. They have been moving troops up to the front line next to the Taliban all day long, Tom. Also, lots of fuel, supplies, ammunition. They are saying that they are ready to strike through Taliban lines and start moving west. And at the same time, as we know, the Taliban announced today that they were moving some 8,000 reinforcements into northern Afghanistan up against the Uzbekistan border, anticipating possible action by American ground forces. So there was a lot happening in terms of this 5-year-old civil war here between the two sides, and I think you'll see more in the coming days as the Northern Alliance tries to take advantage of the Taliban, which may be off balance now because of these air.
We expect to see the President of the United States in about 6 minutes at 12:50 Eastern Time. He did return earlier from Camp David than scheduled. There's been a fair amount of activity at the White House. We want to go to Islamabad now, the capital of Pakistan, which has proved to be such a key ally. It is one of the recognized Taliban government. It lives with that Taliban government cheek by jowl, and of course it has its own very substantial radical Islamic population within Pakistan. A lot at stake in that capital city.
You're right. There is a significant, it's been a persistent and very vocal opposition here to the Pakistani government's decision to give its full support to the United States some time ago. There are reports that perhaps as many as 3 key religious leaders in Pakistan were placed under house arrest today with military and armored police outside of their homes to make sure that they did not incite any other further demonstrations, and there were in fact no big demonstrations here today. The government also announced in recent days that it was going to cut off relations with the Taliban for all intents and purposes. There is still a Taliban embassy present here, and the ambassador has been making a number of statements, but more significantly perhaps the Pakistani government said it would no longer send any delegations into Afghanistan to try and mediate this crisis. You'll remember that the General Pervez Musharraf, the president here, met with the British Prime Minister Tony Blair a couple of days ago, and he came out then very forcefully and said that in his mind he was convinced that there was compelling evidence that Osama bin Laden was behind these terrorist attacks. A significant move by a gradual move by the government here, and again today they took a number of key steps to try and heighten security, to prepare and crack down in case there is any opposition and any vocal protest to what is clearly going on across the border now in Afghanistan. The capital of Pakistan is some 200 miles from Kabul. We've been hearing of eyewitness reports saying that they are seeing plumes of smoke over the capital. There are eyewitness reports coming this way suggesting that there has been multiple rockets hitting the capital and also that the power is out there. I don't know if you're hearing that back there as well, but the situation being monitored very closely here. A key frontline state, very worried about what might happen, what repercussions might spill over as this attack goes on. Tom?
All right, thanks very much, NBC's Ron Allen. In fact, we are hearing that power is out in Kabul. An Associated Press reporter filing from there reported first thunderous explosions, then return anti-aircraft fire, and the electricity has been cut off. Kabul and military targets are now under attack by the United States, both from the air and probably from cruise missiles. We expect to get details in about 3 or 4 minutes or so from President George W. Bush, who is the commander-in-chief of this operation. NBC's Tim Russert is in Washington right now. Tim?
Tom, look for the president to say that we waited 26 days after the incident at the World Trade Center in the Pentagon. We cannot be endlessly patient. We wanted to wait till we had conclusive proof that Osama bin Laden and al-Qaeda were responsible. It is imperative, the president believes, that he continue to emphasize this is not war against Islam, this is not war against the Muslim world, but it's specifically the terrorists responsible for the acts in the United States. Look for him also, Tom, to underscore the humanitarian assistance that is coming to the Afghan people, basically telling them that they will be better off once these terrorists have been removed from their country and perhaps even a new government installed. It is emphatic, it is absolutely important that the president emphasize in this speech to the world, Tom, they're thinking far beyond the borders of the United States, that this is a distinct, discreet, selective military attack, trying to weed out the terrorists. It will be followed by massive humanitarian assistance.
And Tim, up to this point, the United States has done what appears to be a very effective job in persuading not only its allies, but also adversaries of the culpability of Osama bin Laden in those attacks in the World Trade Center.
When the president of Pakistan announces there is enough evidence for an indictment in a criminal court against Osama bin Laden, that is a huge, major step in trying to convince people of just the culpability of Mr. bin Laden.
All right, thank you very much, NBC's Tim Russert. With these fast-breaking and critical developments, of course, a lot has been scrambled today, including television programming, and the NASCAR race that you thought you would be seeing on NBC will now be seen on TNT on cable. That is TNT on cable as we continue our special NBC News coverage here and on MSNBC, obviously, on MSNBC.com. Momentarily, we do expect to hear from the president. Let's go quickly back to the Pentagon now. NBC, Jim Miklashevsky. Jim.
Tom, to follow up very briefly on what Tim was talking about, the military targets are quite clearly aimed specifically at the Taliban and the al-Qaeda terrorist camps and Osama bin Laden. Now, U.S. military officials, through various intelligence sources in the region and through what they know about the Taliban, are fairly well convinced. Now, of course, all plans go out the window after the first shots are fired, but they're fairly well convinced, Tom, that it will not take a very long, sustained military campaign before the Taliban collapses unto itself. And after that, they believe that the ground will then be prepared for a much longer, sustained U.S. military campaign to hunt down and root out the terrorists and Osama bin Laden. Perhaps even involving a U.S. base inside Afghanistan. It's one of the reasons that U.S. officials were not overly concerned in the very beginning when they weren't being allowed to base some of their forces in bases on countries surrounding Afghanistan, because it was felt that at some point there may be an opportunity to operate safely from within Afghanistan itself. That was part of the long-range planning. Of course, it's all dependent on how effective this first wave of strikes are that could go on for several days. Tom?
All right, thank you very much, NBC Jim McCloskey. Jim just returned from a whirlwind tour conducted by Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld, in which he went to Saudi Arabia, Oman, Uzbekistan, and Egypt, shoring up the alliance in that part of the world. We want to show you very briefly now a map that includes Uzbekistan. That's one of the former Soviet republics just north of Afghanistan, and American troops will be based there so that they can have a base of operations. And NBC's Jim Maseda is in that area right now with a report on the American troops. Jim?
Tom, that's correct. Finally, the last set piece, really, before this offensive could take place, did happen last night. About 1,000, a reinforced battalion, 1,000 U.S. combat troops from Fort Drum, New York, arrived by various cargo planes, military cargo planes. We saw them today along with other TV teams that were trying to get access to this military base. It's a former a former Soviet air base, which was used to prosecute the Soviet war in Afghanistan. We did see C-17s twice and also one C-130. So these troops are in place. We understand by monitoring Uzbeki radio that they are now set up on inside tents on this base, and they're discussing their future needs with Uzbeki army and police. Their mission, Tom, so far, and I repeat, so far, remains defensive and humanitarian. They're basically there for force protection, for perhaps, if this happens, search and rescue operations in case there are American pilots or American special operations forces who are in fact downed or put into trouble in the next few days. However, there is also a very strategic military reason for the United States to get involved in a place like southern Uzbekistan. If you look at that map, you will see that where we are is a direct line shot to the Afghan border, first of all, about 100 miles, and then following on about 350 miles directly onto Kabul, the capital of Afghanistan. Now, what's interesting is that below those planes, if they in fact do fly, use this launch pad here, and do fly offensive operations, there are no Taliban or very few Taliban forces along that track. You have mostly pro-Western, anti-Taliban, pro-Northern Alliance forces all the way down. So that would really limit the amount of anti-aircraft fire and the military threat to American planes and pilots. Tom?
All right, thank you very much, NBC Jim Maseda with American troops from the 10th Mountain Division in Uzbekistan. We want to go back to NBC's Tom Aspel now, who is in northern Afghanistan, about 40 miles from the capital city of Kabul, watching the skies for us. Tom?
Hi, Tom. Well, more AAA fire going up there. Just occasional pinpricks of light in the sky now. But then about 2 minutes ago, two huge orange flashes from explosions, presumably just the other side of the mountains, which are between us and Kabul. And we can still see now just the occasional pinprick of light in the sky as obviously the Taliban guns searching for some kind of target up there. And the light over the plain now behind us, you can't see us on this video phone at the moment, but the moon has just risen behind, just come up from behind the mountains to the east of us, and we have a huge plain leading down to a little range of mountains which cut off us from Kabul there. More flashes of anti-aircraft fire in the sky there, that AAA going up. As I say, presumably looking for targets. We have not seen anything other than those two huge orange explosions a few minutes ago, but quite obviously an attack underway. We're a little bit too far away. We can't hear anything, but we know that now that the target itself is Kabul. Tom?
All right, thank you very much, NBC's Tom Aspel, who, as I say, is in northern Afghanistan. NBC's Dana Lewis is at the headquarters of the Northern Alliance. That is that organization that has been opposed to the Taliban government in Kabul. It once ran Afghanistan for itself. Dana, I know that you've been covering the refugees coming out of there as well. What is the sense of the population that is left in Kabul after all this evacuation?
Well, certainly we've been talking, Tom, even to some of our translators who have come out of there in the last 3 and 4 days, and they say that things are pretty desperate in Kabul. There is not a lot of food. The population is scared. People have been leaving. And of course, they've been looking forward to some UN relief that has only gotten in there in the last week. But before that, of course, the Taliban had chased out the relief agencies. And there is a lot of concern by the relief agencies now that Afghanistan is in a pre-famine condition. And even if the U.S. does these airdrops with food, there's a big question as to whether they will get to those people or not. They say that they are worried that the Taliban will simply steal those stores, take that food, and use it for its own army. The Northern Alliance was saying, by the way, earlier tonight, Tom, that they were warning people in Kabul to stay in their homes, to stay away from military facilities, and even go into the bunkers, although there is not enough for the population there of 1 million people. So there was a lot of caution coming out of here tonight as the Northern Alliance was told to ground its aircraft by the United States, and it did so. And the alliance says that not only would Kabul be targeted tonight, but they were predicting that the city of Kandahar, which, as you know, is the capital for the Taliban, it's their main city, that also would come under attack tonight, although we've had no confirmation so far that that has indeed taken place. Tom?
All right, Dana Lewis, thank you very much with the Northern Alliance headquarters. We're going to go back to Islamabad now, the Pakistan capital city, and NBC's Ron Allen, who is there. What about the Pakistanis? Are they getting any coverage of all this on their television tonight?
Yes, Tom, there is some coverage. There are several international cable channels that people can see here, including Al Jazeera, the 24-hour Arab language news channel, which has been very influential in this part of the world in bringing to people here and elsewhere events, particularly from an Arab perspective. I know here that people have been anticipating this. There's been a lot in the press and a lot on the streets because it seemed that there was momentum building for an American attack. The question here, I think, is how people will react to it. The government has done everything it can to lay the groundwork to convince people here that the American attempt to hunt down bin Laden is justified. But when you go to certain parts of this country, particularly up in the town of Peshawar, near the Afghan border, it's a town of some 2 million people. Half the population is Afghan refugees who have come across during the past 20 years or so. There is a very strong pro-Taliban sentiment there. There are a lot of people who just cannot believe that Osama bin Laden and his network are responsible for this. Those are people who perhaps would never be convinced by any evidence presented to them. But I think the Pakistani government is going to have a job of trying to essentially sell the evidence that has convinced them to the people. They were hoping that there would be more of a public discussion, a public disclosure of the evidence of the case against bin Laden and his associates, particularly up there where, again, there have been protests. There may be more protests. The government has been on alert. There have been also a lot of troop movements in that area, and perhaps importantly as well, the government has kept that border area sealed now for the better part of the month since we have been here. They were concerned about Taliban sympathizers coming across with refugees. They've also been very concerned about weapons coming across and perhaps an uprising in this area. Tom, back to you.
All right, thank you very much, NBC's Ron Allen. We expect to hear from the president now at 1 Eastern time. That's about 1 minute and 30 seconds away. Let's go briefly to NBC's David Gregory, who is at the White House. David?
Far from Ari Fleischer, the president's spokesman, who said succinctly, we have begun another front in this war on terrorism. The president will speak, as you mentioned, and to follow on Tim Russard's point from earlier, administration officials have said that a lot of supporters in this campaign have appreciated the U.S. restraint. It's been a major point to get across to the American people and the rest of the world as to why the United States has waited this long before this additional front against terrorism has begun. Tom?
Briefly, David, before we do hear from the president, should we expect any surprises in his speech on the diplomatic or political front?
Not that we're aware of, Tom, and we're also not expecting a lot of detail about the military operations now underway.
All right, thank you very much, NBC David Gregory. So to bring you quickly up to date, it's now coming up on 1 o'clock Eastern time in Afghanistan because of the time differences. It is 9:30 there, and a major attack is underway by U.S. military forces. We're about to get the details on all of that from the President of the United States, who returned from Camp David earlier. He'll be addressing the nation from the Oval Office in his capacity as the chief executive of this country, but also as the commander-in-chief of all U.S. armed forces. And as we have been saying, he is also expected to talk in diplomatic political terms.
On my orders, the United States military has begun strikes against al-Qaeda terrorist training camps and military installations of the Taliban regime in Afghanistan. These carefully targeted actions are designed to disrupt the use of Afghanistan as a terrorist base of operations and to attack the military capability of the Taliban regime. We are joined in this operation by our staunch friend, Great Britain. Other close friends, including Canada, Australia, Germany, and France, have pledged forces as the operation unfolds. More than 40 countries in the Middle East, Africa, Europe, and across Asia have granted air transit or landing rights. Many more have shared intelligence. We are supported by the collective will of the world. More than 2 weeks ago, I gave Taliban leaders a series of clear and specific demands. Close terrorist training camps, hand over leaders of the al-Qaeda network, and return all foreign nationals, including American citizens unjustly detained in your country. None of these demands were met. And now, the Taliban will pay a price. By destroying camps and disrupting communications, we will make it more difficult for the terror network to train new recruits and coordinate their evil plans. Initially, the terrorists may burrow deeper into caves and other entrenched hiding places. Our military action is also designed to clear the way for sustained, comprehensive, and relentless operations to drive them out and bring them to justice. At the same time, the oppressed people of Afghanistan will know the generosity of America and our allies. As we strike military targets, we will also drop food, medicine, and supplies to the starving and suffering men and women and children of Afghanistan. The United States of America is a friend to the Afghan people, and we are the friends of almost 1 billion worldwide who practice the Islamic faith. The United States of America is an enemy of those who aid terrorists and of the barbaric criminals who profane a great religion by committing murder in its name. This military action is a part of our campaign against terrorism, another front in a war that has already been joined through diplomacy, intelligence, the freezing of financial assets, and the arrests of known terrorists by law enforcement agents in 38 countries. Given the nature and reach of our enemies, we will win this conflict by the patient accumulation of successes, by meeting a series of challenges with determination and will and purpose. Today we focus on Afghanistan, but the battle is broader. Every nation has a choice to make. In this conflict, there is no neutral ground. If any government sponsors the outlaws and killers of innocents, they have become outlaws and murderers themselves, and they will take that lonely path at their own peril. I'm speaking to you today from the treaty room of the White House, a place where American presidents have worked for peace. We're a peaceful nation. Yet as we have learned so suddenly and so tragically, there can be no peace in a world of sudden terror. In the face of today's new threat, the only way to pursue peace is to pursue those who threaten it. We did not ask for this mission, but we will fulfill it. The name of today's military operation is Enduring Freedom. We defend not only our precious freedoms, but also the freedom of people everywhere to live and raise their children free from fear. I know many Americans feel fear today, and our government is taking strong precautions. All law enforcement and intelligence agencies are working aggressively around America, around the world, and around the clock. At my request, many governors have activated the National Guard to strengthen airport security. We have called up reserves to reinforce our military capability and strengthen the protection of our homeland. In the months ahead, our patience will be one of our strengths. Patience with the long waits that will result from tighter security. Patience in understanding that it will take time to achieve our goals. Patience in all the sacrifices that may come. Today, those sacrifices are being made by members of our armed forces who now defend us so far from home, and by their proud and worried families. A commander-in-chief sends America's sons and daughters into a battle in a foreign land only after the greatest care and a lot of prayer. We ask a lot of those who wear our uniform. We ask them to leave their loved ones, to travel great distances, to risk injury, even to be prepared to make the ultimate sacrifice of their lives. They are dedicated. They are honorable. They represent the best of our country, and we are grateful. To all the men and women in our military, every sailor, every soldier, every airman, every Coast Guardsman, every Marine, I say this: your mission is defined, your objectives are clear, your goal is just. You have my full confidence, and you will have every tool you need to carry out your duty. I recently received a touching letter that says a lot about the state of America in these difficult times. A letter from a 4th grade girl with a father in the military. As much as I don't want my dad to fight, she wrote, I'm willing to give him to you. This is a precious gift, the greatest she could give. This young girl knows what America is all about. Since September 11, an entire generation of young Americans has gained new understanding of the value of freedom and its cost in duty and in sacrifice. The battle is now joined on many fronts. We will not waver, we will not tire, we will not falter, and we will not fail. Peace and freedom will prevail. Thank you. May God continue to bless America.
President George W. Bush, in his capacity as President of the United States, also as Commander-in-Chief, updating this nation on the military action that is now underway, designed to disrupt the communication facilities of the Taliban and to destroy. Word that the air base in Kandahar, which is in the southern part of Afghanistan, it's a command base, that is the headquarters of the Taliban officially, that too has been destroyed. The President making several points, saying that we are joined in this military operation specifically by Great Britain. Of course, the Prime Minister of Britain, Tony Blair, has been an exceptional friend of the United States during all of this, an ambassador to Pakistan. He has spoken out very strongly on several occasions, and we do expect to hear from him before too long as well. The President then talked about the food and emergency supplies and medicine that would be dropped to the beleaguered other people in Afghanistan, reaching out, as he has for the last 10 days or so, to the Islamic people who are not yet committed to the radical view that Osama bin Laden has so vigorously embraced. And he talked about the fear in this country. So many Americans worrying about another attack of some kind, especially now that American military action has begun. He talked about the many steps that the administration is taking on that front. NBC's Jim Miklashevsky is at the Pentagon now. Jim, what's the assessment so far of the strikes up to this point?
Well, according to U.S. military officials, so far so good. It appears that the early strikes have hit their intended targets. It's impossible to tell exactly how precise everything was, Tom, until they get later bomb damage assessment. But we're getting a little more detail now on what the U.S. military strikes were aimed at first. Most critically, command and control, from which the Taliban would direct any kind of military response, especially air defenses against the U.S. Early targets also included air defense system and power grids. We were hearing reports from the area that Kabul went dark. That's because the electrical systems there were targeted in those first strikes. And in terms of weapons, Tom, that were used initially, we're told that the first wave of...
Friday night at 8 on TNT. We know drama. Pep Boys just rolled back tire prices. 70,000-mile touring tires rolled back to 4 from $159.96. SUV tires.
Weaponry as the B-52 long-range bombers that have been pre-positioned in Diego Garcia, and B-2 bombers, which took off earlier today from their base at Whiteman in Missouri. It's about an estimated 12 to 15-hour trip over to that region, a little less. And once they drop their weaponry for today, they too will be repositioned in the region for subsequent strikes that will follow in the days ahead. Also, the president, it was interesting, Tom, that he would lead his speech by listing all the allies that are involved. First of all, Great Britain involved in the strikes today, Canada, Australia, France, ready to join in subsequent strikes. One of the objectives of the administration in the past week or so is to drive home the point that this is not the U.S. against any particular country or against the Islamic religion, but it's the U.S. and a broad coalition of countries against terrorism in general. And Tom, you just mentioned ago, fears at home. While these strikes are underway today, there are a number of sporting events across the United States, including football, and the U.S. Air Force is flying protective air cover, combat air patrol over major sporting events in the United States today. Tom?
All right, thank you very much, NBC's Jim Miklashevsky. That, of course, is the stark reality of the world in which we live now, that in American sporting events, wherever large crowds are gathered, as a precaution, we have a so-called CAP mission in which they have combat air patrols overhead to keep an eye out for security as well. It does appear now that the initial wave of these strikes against command and control centers and the training camps and an air base in Kandahar in the southern part of Afghanistan may be over. Let's go to NBC's Tom Aspel now, who is about 40 miles north of Kabul. There's a mountain range between them, but he has been able to see some activity in the skies. What's it like now, Tom?
Tom, very tranquil to the south of us now. No more anti-aircraft fire that we can see for the moment. Completely dark, actually, down to the south there. One observation we could make now that we've heard that those first strikes were probably cruise missiles coming into command and control centers in Kabul. One of the great differences we've noticed is that almost a total lack of fire going up trying to hit those cruise missiles, unlike the Iraqis when they would get some warning from the south or from the east of the country that cruise missiles were on the way. Even though they couldn't see them, they would hose the skies with AAA fire, and indeed on a couple of occasions managed to hit those cruise missiles. But the fact that there wasn't much fire going up tonight indicates that there really isn't much communication between the borders and Kabul itself to let those gunners know that there's something coming in. So we think they're probably just waiting until they heard the sound of them coming in and then putting up as much as they could in the hope that they'd hit something. But it was really lacking. There wasn't anything like the blanket of fire that we'd been waiting to expect there when those first strikes began. We did see the orange flashes of two huge explosions down there. Impossible to know, of course, whether they were secondary explosions. We'd have to wait for the BDA, the bomb damage assessment, tomorrow to find out exactly what they'd hit. But the thing about the attacks tonight, Tom, just not much fire and absolutely no missile trails going up into the sky over Kabul, Tom.
All right, thank you very much, NBC's Tom Aspel. General Barry McCaffrey is one of our military consultants during the course of this, what appears to be a long campaign now. General McCaffrey, the Taliban command and control centers are not terribly sophisticated, are they?
Well, there's still a lot of equipment there. There's probably 600 some odd armored vehicles, 40 or 50 aircraft, a dozen helicopters, there's transmitters. These people are like tethered goats waiting for U.S. air and naval power to go after them. I think what we're seeing again is the first day of the longest campaign. These people are about to understand what it feels like to be hunted day and night.
It can't all be done from the sky. At some point, however, if we are to be successful, it's going to mean troops on the ground.
Absolutely. I'd be astonished they weren't there already. The reconnaissance elements will be keeping these people under observation, and at selected periods on the ground, in my estimation, we can go anywhere in Afghanistan in the coming months, seize ground, hold it, accomplish a mission, and then come out, but at great risk. These young people and the operatives of the special forces are going to go in and put their lives on the line when they land.
It's not too soon to begin preparing the American people for the idea that casualties, the last couple of military actions that the United States has been involved in, Kosovo notably, and troops on the ground just keeping the peace, have not involved that. But these are the harsh realities of war, General.
Yeah, no question. You know, you're going to see U.S. Army Rangers and SEALs and other special units get on the ground, root these people out of caves, and kill them at close range. It will be very dangerous work, but these are enormously well-trained, well-equipped, and determined people that we're putting in action.
General Barry McCaffrey, thank you very much. He'll continue to be with us during this day and, of course, during what he describes as this long campaign, because it is not over with the capture or the death of Osama bin Laden. In fact, former President Bill Clinton said that would be just the beginning, not the end. There are terrorist cells around the world. In fact, just over the weekend, the Filipino government had what it described as a successful military action against Islamic radicals in that country. We are expecting shortly to hear from the British Prime Minister, Tony Blair. He'll be addressing us, and then this afternoon as well, the Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld and the new Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, an Air Force General by the name of Myers, will be talking to us as well. Let's go to NBC's Dana Lewis now, who is at the Northern Alliance headquarters in Afghanistan. And Dana, what are you hearing from the people at the headquarters there about what their next involvement may be?
Well, Tom, I think first of all, they say that there are some rules in this and that they have been warning the United States, and that is that the U.S. Will find a lot of friends on the ground here in the short term. A lot of people have felt that the rule of the Taliban has been extremely harsh and that they will get a lot of sympathy on the ground and help from the Northern Alliance. But there is also a warning that any campaign has to be very careful not to hit civilians. Otherwise, the U.S. could risk people turning against them on the ground here, and also that there is going to be a tremendous wave of refugees. Some people are talking about 1.5 million refugees already on the move, and it could increase. And don't forget, this country's been through 4 years of drought already, so people are desperate. The refugee agencies have been kicked out by the Taliban in the last few weeks, so conditions are severe. November, the winter is coming, and they say that people could turn into, it could be a real famine here involving millions of people. So there is great concern that even as this military action is going on tonight, that tomorrow we'll see new waves of refugees. We should also mention that the Taliban, of course, had moved 8,000 troops up today, reinforcing the border next to Uzbekistan, believing that the U.S. troops may cross that border. And of course, they have long-range artillery and rockets, and they say that they will fight the Americans, while the Northern Alliance itself, which controls 10% of this country and has been waiting for a chance to strike the Taliban, I'd say, Tom, we'll see action from them very soon, if not tomorrow, within a matter of days. They were moving up extra fuel, extra ammunition, extra troops, some 4,000 on the road just 2 days ago when we were there. They believe that they can hit through, punch through the Taliban front lines and begin to move into some of the key areas. They want to take some of those cities back. Tom?
All right, thank you very much, NBC's Dana Lewis. Let's go to Uzbekistan now. NBC's Jim Maseda is with some American troops from the 10th Mountain Division that have been deployed there. Jim, what are you hearing?
Well, Tom, it's still very quiet here in the skies over this town, which we are not allowed to mention for very specific reasons. We do not want to pinpoint exactly where we are on the map, but it does remain quiet here, although we do know that at least 1,000 U.S. troops are well deployed now inside a former Soviet air base, only about 2 or 3 miles behind me. But I wanted to pick up on a point, if I have time, from a point that Dana Lewis just made. We just came a couple of days ago from the Iranian-Afghan border. We were up along that border, both inside Iran and in no man's land with Afghanistan. And we were in touch with several militias, particularly a militia leader and his son, who are preparing, they told us, and others who have been there recently, to move from the west, that is from Iran, into Afghanistan as soon as they got the, quote, green light, very similar to what the KLA was saying a couple of years ago, waiting for those NATO attacks, air attacks on Kosovo. So it's not the only group involved. And this is an anti-Taliban, pro-Shiite group linked to Iran, but there are other groups as you go around the periphery. Ethnic group that is willing to fight against the Taliban. You have here in Uzbekistan a very, very large and well-armed group of anti-Taliban forces. So not only the Northern Alliance is going to be ready and willing and armed to move down south, but you're going to have a pincer effect from the west and from the north and from the northwest as well. All these groups moving towards Kabul, basically liberating areas that were taken from them in 1995 and 1996 by Taliban forces. Tom?
All right, thank you very much, NBC's Jim Maseda. I want to go now to General.
Just a little slip like that.